So we are here at the end of a wonderful day, but in many ways, and with all respect to our amazing panelists, I think for some of us, we have saved the best for last. The School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University celebrates its centennial in the year 1919, 1920. We were founded in 1919 at the end of World War I, as the Jesuits here at Georgetown sought to make the world, to borrow from Woodrow Wilson, safe for democracy. And the idea was that by teaching young people about politics, diplomacy, history, we could prevent another tragedy like World War I. Of course, World War II, if anything, suggested just how crucial the work of a place like the School of Foreign Service could be. And so as we thought about the centennial of the SFS and about the need for diplomacy, about the need for understanding history, if we are going to try and make the next century a better one, my first thought was that we need to get Ram here. This is a particularly momentous week, as I think he might explain in his lecture, in the context of India's history. April 5th was the 100th anniversary of the Rowlatt Act, and tomorrow, April 13th, is the 100th anniversary of Jallianwala Bagh and the massacre that occurred there. So 100 years later, we are on the cusp of another transition, an election that's happening, as we know, as we speak. And I asked Ram if he would come. He's come all the way from Bangalore to participate here today and help us think about what the century has meant and what it means for the century that goes forward. Ram Guha needs very little introduction. For many of us, he has been really synonymous with the notion of intellectual historian and public historian, public intellectual for India. His now completed trilogy of Indian history has reshaped our understanding, has become a standard textbook in classrooms around the world. And so it is with great pleasure and with much honor that I ask Ram Guha to join me on stage. Please.
Thank you, Irfan, and thank you all. I'm delighted to be here, and it's an interesting and significant coincidence that this conference is 100 years after the two events that Irfan mentioned. The Rowlatt Satyagraha, which was on Sunday, April 6, 1919, which established Mahatma Gandhi as an all-India leader. And exactly a week later, the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh, which effectively ended the British Empire. Though, of course, it took a long time dying, but that was a mortal blow from which it was destined not to recover. Now, I'm going to talk about India's journey, not really since then, but since 1947. And I'm going to start with a quote from Gandhi. Now, I've spent much of my life working on Gandhi, so I'm somewhat biased in his favor. You spend, it's worth your while to spend 20 years writing on someone you like Gandhi, or someone you dislike, like Hitler. Otherwise, if you have sort of relatively indifferent feelings about someone, you write a short book and finish him off and get on to something else. Now, but having said that, what is really striking about Gandhi? Among all 20th century leaders in Asia and Africa, or perhaps anywhere else, is that he was much more than a freedom fighter. He was a social reformer, a religious pluralist, a prophet, a thinker, a writer. And he was never really interested simply in winning independence for India. Political independence was merely one among many aspects of what he wanted his country to become. So, in 1919, as I said, he organized the Rowlatt Satyagraha, which really brought him onto the world stage. The next year commenced the non-cooperation movement, which was an even more impressive display of popular, non-violent sentiment and struggle against British rule. And in the course of the non-cooperation movement in 1922, Gandhi defined what Swaraj or freedom should be for Indians. So I'm going to give you Gandhi's definition of Swaraj. Now, Gandhi would have been terrific in the age of Twitter. Now, I think it's a model his prose is a model of lucidity, elegance, and brevity. So for students particularly, less is more. And Gandhi would have been superb in the age of Twitter. And here is a tweet of his from 1922. Removal of untouchability, manufacture of khaddar, or homespun cloth, removal of untouchability, manufacture of khaddar, Hindu-Muslim unity, cultivation of non-violence are not measures of a temporary nature. They are the four pillars on which such structure of Swaraj must forever rest. Take away any one of them and it must topple down. So this is a lovely image of Swaraj, of freedom, as a bed with four sturdy posts. And the four posts that Gandhi said will uphold Swaraj. He's writing in 1922, 25 years before Swaraj actually comes about. The four posts that will uphold Swaraj are non-violence, abolition of untouchability, Hindu-Muslim harmony, and Swadeshi, or economic self-reliance. And my talk is going to be about these four pillars. And to what extent, over the last 70-odd years of independence, we have succeeded in making each one of these pillars robust, or how robust are each one of these pillars in India today. So, but let me just reinterpret those four pillars of Gandhi. Non-violence, the pillar of non-violence, I'm going to gloss as political democracy. Non-violence, the fact that Gandhi organized a popular movement against British colonial rule based on non-violence and not on violence, unlike many other anti-colonial liberation struggles all across the world, meant that after independence, India became a political democracy in which, after we were free, we settled our debates and disputes through dialogue, not through the force of arms. So very different from China or Vietnam or Ghana or Cuba or so many other countries that won their freedom through armed struggle. So political non-violence is, I'm going to gloss as political democracy. When Gandhi spoke of abolition of untouchability as the second pillar of Swaraj, I'm going to call that social justice, the pillar of social justice. And I'm going to broaden social justice to include not just justice for those at the bottom of the caste hierarchy, but also justice for women. So gender and caste equality became the second pillar of Swaraj in the Gandhian conception. Hindu-Muslim harmony, which was something, as you know, Gandhi lived and died for, I'm also going to expand it, and I'm going to think of this third pillar as broadly defined as cultural pluralism, not only the freedom to practice your own religion, but also the freedom to speak your own language. One of the major conceptual differences between nationhood in United States and nationhood in India is to be a good Indian, you don't have to be a Hindu and you don't have to speak Hindi either. And of course, you don't also have to hate Pakistan, but that's a separate question, which we'll leave for later. So cultural pluralism is the third pillar. And the fourth pillar, economic self-reliance, is self-evident. The removal of mass poverty and of dependence on foreign nations, because India was ruled by a multinational corporation which looted, exploited, plundered our country. So those are the four pillars of Swaraj, of freedom. There's a political pillar, which is non-violence or democracy. There's a social pillar, which is justice, particularly equality for women and for low castes. There's a cultural pillar, which is religious and linguistic pluralism. And there's an economic pillar, which is removal of mass poverty and dependence on foreign nations. Now, 72 years after independence, 100 years after Gandhi tweeted this wonderfully evocative image of what Swaraj should be, how have we done? How robust is Swaraj? How robust is each one of these four pillars? And I'm going to take each of these four pillars in turn, and I'm going to give you a, shall we say, a historian's report card. How has my country done in over the last 72 years in each of these four spheres. So I'm going to begin with political freedom. How free are Indians? How democratic is the Republic of India? The time and place that Indians are most free is when voting in a panchayat, legislative or parliamentary election. That's when we are most free. The holding of regular, free and fair elections is perhaps the single greatest achievement of independent India. And it is so remarkable because it is so counterintuitive. Never before did a large and poor country embrace universal adult franchise. And our experiment or the experiment of our founding fathers and founding mothers in granting the franchise to a poor and illiterate population was widely mocked. In 1952, we held our first general elections. A Madras editor, I'm embarrassed to say a distant relative of mine, said of those 1952 elections that they are the biggest gamble in history. The RSS journal organizer, which still functions, said in 1952 of those elections, Pandit Nehru will live to confess the failure of universal adult franchise in India. That's the RSS in 1952. I wonder if they've changed their mind now, since that's brought them to power, right? A former ICS officer supervising the 1952 elections in Manipur, the tribal state of Manipur, said, a future and more enlightened age will view with astonishment the absurd farce of recording the votes of millions of illiterate people. A last verdict on the 1952 elections comes from a predecessor of Ambassador Rich Verma, I won't name him, an American ambassador to India said, a poll of 200 million eligible voters, most of them illiterate, is the biggest farce ever staged in the name of democracy anywhere in the world. Now, it's quite astonishing. No one thought we would bring it off, that elections, universal adult franchise in a large, diverse, complex, poor, desperately poor and divided country was regarded as a joke. But we held one election, then we held a second, then we held a third, and still people weren't satisfied. In 1967, following our war with China in 1962 and our war with Pakistan in 1965, against the backdrop of three successive failures of the monsoon and famine, the correspondent of the London Times came visiting our country and wrote a series of articles on what he called India's disintegrating democracy. This correspondent, whom I shall leave unnamed, his name is there in the footnotes of my book, India After Gandhi, if you want to look it up. He's still around somewhere, by the way, and he's probably read those footnotes. He said in 1967 about our general election then forthcoming, famine is threatening, the administration is strained, the government and the governing party have lost public confidence in themselves, there is an emotional readiness for the rejection of parliamentary democracy, and Indians will soon vote in the fourth and surely last general election because the great experiment of developing India within a democratic framework has failed. Now, this is the fourth election, and we are now approaching the 17th. So this is our greatest achievement, our sustenance of multi-party democracy and regular elections. And as I said, this is the time, the moment at which Indians are totally free. The reason I'm flown in and flown out is that my constituency goes to vote on the 18th, next Friday. And my wife and I will go. We'll have an argument while walking towards the booth. She'll go left and I'll go right. And who knows who she's voted for and whom I voted for. Now, just a small footnote on this. You would have noticed there's been a flurry of signature campaigns about how to vote. Now, I think my views about Indian politics and Indian politicians are well known. But I did not sign a petition issued by writers on how to vote. And I did not because I think it's utterly patronizing for a writer or a professor or a scientist or a filmmaker to tell other people how to vote. to pull rank, as it were. As I know from my own experience, I can't persuade my wife on following me in how to vote, and that's exactly how it should be. So that's the time we are absolutely free. That is, as I said, the Republic of India's greatest achievement, the holding of free, fair, and regular elections. Another key aspect of political freedom is the freedom of movement and association. So unlike in China, for example, Indians can travel where they want, they can befriend whom they want, they can go on dharnas and protests and morchas wherever they want. So when it comes to political democracy, free and fair elections, free movement of people, free association, but the areas in which Indian democracy is seriously deficient when compared to more mature democracies. Freedom of expression is one. We have many archaic colonial laws on the statute book, which are used and misused and abused to ban works of art and books and films. Then there's the rise of identity politics, where where in a sense, almost the only Indian you can freely criticize is the father of the nation. Because Gandhi belongs to no one and everyone. Whereas with many other regional, linguistic, caste icons, there are problems about fair and accurate representation. So when it comes to freedom of expression, we are decidedly less democratic than our constitution makers hoped us to be. Another blot on our democratic credentials is the arbitrary and often brutal behavior of the police and the paramilitary. And I'm glad Ambassador Haqqani mentioned Kashmir, because Kashmir is one part of India in which the Indian police and the paramilitary has often used excessive force, and that is something that does not bring credit to our democratic credentials. So that's our record when it comes to political freedom, mixed. Let me come now to social justice, the second pillar that Gandhi hoped would sustain Swaraj. Now, the French anthropologist Louis Dumont wrote a book many years ago. I don't know whether it's still prescribed in college texts, unlikely. It's called Homo Hierarchicus. And the title tells you that Louis Dumont thought that Indians were particularly prone to elaborating forms of hierarchy and social discrimination, and on that he was dead right. The caste system is, in my view, the most subtle, sophisticated, and diabolical system of social discrimination ever invented by humans. It must have been a truly great philosopher who invented the caste system. And likewise with gender. The two major religious traditions in India, Islam and Hinduism, or Hinduism and Islam, in that order, discrimination against women is part both of social practice and scriptural tradition. So we were a deeply unequal society. I mean, if you read B.R. Ambedkar's writings on caste, not so much on gender, but if you read the writings on gender of Pandita Ramabai, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, and other 19th century reformers, you get a sense of how deep and pervasive caste and gender discrimination was. And the Indian Constitution, which is a revolutionary document, sought to do away with caste and gender equality. The law abolished untouchability. The Constitution abolished untouchability. The Constitution made women equal to men, in both respects going radically counter to Indian tradition, custom, history, philosophy, social life, etc., etc. But while the Constitution abolished untouchability and made women equal to men, the practice does not always match up to the law. You know, when you think of social equality and the practice of social equality, there are three ways in which you would wish equality to be enacted. One is before God. You know, anyone can go into a temple. You can have female priests as well as male priests. So equality before God, equality under the law, and equality in social practice. In India, equality in social practice is the area in which we are most deficit. There continue to be attacks on Dalits or untouchables in our villages, even in our cities. I mean, it was conventionally believed that urbanization would lead to a diminution of caste distinctions. But if you look at the tragic suicide of Rohit Vemula in the University of Hyderabad, in one of our most advanced cities, in one of our best public universities, in a faculty of science, discrimination was so pervasive that a brilliant young student was forced to take his life. So, discrimination against Dalits continues. Discrimination against women continues. I mean, if you look at anthropological studies, even today, though obviously the enrollment of girls in education is going up all the time, but if you could look at studies within the household and preferential treatment to male children, if you look at the violence against women, both within the household and on the street, these are certainly things that we need to worry about. However, it's important to recognize that while caste and gender discrimination continues in many subtle and not so subtle ways, there is also progress. And there are two ways in which I believe India has progressed under the radar, not visible perhaps to outside observers. The first is that steadily over the last 30 years in particular, there's been a loosening of the link between caste and occupation. Caste historically determined what profession you took. If your father was a cobbler, you became a cobbler. The priesthood was restricted to those who were Brahmins. Land holding was massively concentrated in those who were from the Kshatriya caste. Now that is changing steadily. It's changing in different degrees in different parts of India. But it's clear that the link between caste and occupation is breaking down. The son of a farmer or the daughter of a farmer can become a school teacher. If you look at, for example, the deepening of the business community, one of the best recent books on the social history of post-independence India is a book called India's New Capitalists by Harish Damodaran, which I strongly recommend to those of you who study economics, because it's an account of the deepening of India's entrepreneurial class. Once upon a time, entrepreneurs were really essentially Baniyas and a few Brahmins and Parsis. Now you have OBCs, Dalits, farming communities, Gaudas, Idavas, Marathas becoming entrepreneurs. So there's a loosening of the link between caste and occupation, which means that you're more free to practice something that was not your traditional caste occupation. And there's also a loosening of the link between family and marriage, that more and more Indians are choosing their romantic partners, which is an expansion, of course, of freedom, particularly for women. So my judgment as a historian would be that if women and Dalits, women and the former untouchables, known as Dalits, if women and Dalits were historically the most discriminated sections of Indian society, perhaps it would be African Americans and women in this country, Dalits and women are less unfree now in 2019 than at any previous time in Indian history. Over the last 70 years, because of democracy, because of a modern constitution, because of economic growth, because of greater social mobility between the villages and the cities, because of the expansion of education, women and Dalits, though still discriminated against, are less unfree, that they could have made much more progress. But you are talking about 70 years of small, steady gains against a backdrop of maybe 5,000 years of endemic and systemic discrimination. However, there is one section of Indian society that is arguably worse off today than in 1947, and those are the tribals, the Adivasis. This is the unacknowledged tragedy of Indian independence, our treatment of tribals. They are even worse off than the Dalits. They have been systematically dispossessed of their land, their forests, and their other resources. They have been made ecological refugees. They are massively underrepresented in the political class, in the professional class. I mean, there are some smart political scientists should do a study on this. Why is it that when elections come, every political party makes a pitch for the Dalit vote, but not for the tribal vote? Why is it that Dalits have been, and tribals are quite substantial, they're about 8% of India's population. Why is it that you've had Dalit ministers, Dalit chief justices, Dalit presidents, Dalit governors, but never tribal chief justices, governors, presidents, and so on and so forth. So all studies of access to economic and social resources show that when it comes to education, health, sanitation, and so on, access to roads, tribals are even worse off than Dalits. I mean, I've written a long essay on this in one of my books, and the anthropologist Nandini Sundar, who has studied this subject extensively, and her book, The Burning Forest, is a marvelous and deeply moving ethnography of the continuing discrimination against India's tribal people. So I've talked about politics, I've talked about society, and now I'm going to talk, thirdly, about culture. Two core components of cultural freedom are the freedom to speak and learn in the language of your choice, and the freedom to worship a god or gods of your choice, or no god at all. So linguistic pluralism and religious pluralism. Now, I think our record in the first regard is excellent. The sustenance of linguistic pluralism is next only to the holding of free and fair elections, independent India's greatest achievement. And this is a great, actually, democratic innovation. You know, my American friends who get paranoid that some county in, California, Arizona, everyone is speaking, Spanish, or in some street in Brooklyn, people are speaking Chinese, you have this kind of thing. Now, it's a very great achievement. And it's owed largely to Gandhi. And it's owed largely to the fact that Gandhi lived in the diaspora. If Gandhi, for argument's sake, had succeeded at the bar in Bombay, where he practiced after returning from London, all his clients would have been Gujaratis. And 90% of them would have been Gujarati Baniyas. Fortunately, he failed. Because if Gandhi had succeeded at the bar in Bombay, I would not be talking to you here today, because I wouldn't have written a life of Gandhi, right? Now, it's the diaspora that saved him from professional obscurity, and it's the diaspora that made him understand the religious and linguistic diversity of India. He published a newspaper in the diaspora in South Africa called Indian Opinion. It was a newspaper published in 4 languages and 4 scripts. It was printed in English, Gujarati, Tamil, and Hindi. And it's his understanding that India did not belong to one religious group or one linguistic community that actually led him to forge the kind of policies he brought back to India, and which were then encoded in our constitution. I mean, there's this among certain sections of India, certain politicians in India, even today, there is insecurity about large numbers of Indians not speaking Hindi. You still have Hindi zealots who try to promote it in South India. But if you look around us, Pakistan was formed on the basis of religion, but broke because Jinnah went to Dhaka and said, all of you Bengalis have to learn Urdu. Sri Lanka, again, went through 30 years of a bloody, bloody civil war on the issue of language, because the dominant Cellular population wanted to suppress the Tamil language of the Tamils of the north. And again, I live in Bangalore, which you know as the great epicenter of India's IT revolution. And it's my view that if there had been no civil war in Sri Lanka, the IT revolution would have taken place there and not in my city, because they had much higher rates of education, women's emancipation, and so on and so forth. So our sustenance of linguistic pluralism, the idea that you can speak, learn, be educated in, administer yourself in any language in the language of your region. And we are talking about great classical languages. I mean, out of our 17 languages on a rupee note, most of them have literatures going back hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, Hindi, by the way, is the youngest. And maybe the crudest too, Right. And you have Tamil and Odia and Malayalam and Telugu and so on. And the fact that these were retained. And English and Hindi became linked languages. They're still there, and they're used to communicate across linguistic groups. That, I think, is one reason we really are united. If we had imposed Hindi on South India, we would have become like Sri Lanka. So our record when it comes to sustaining linguistic pluralism is excellent, but our record when it comes to sustaining interfaith harmony and religious pluralism is decidedly more mixed. Muslims, who are our dominant religious minority, are freer to practice their faith in India than, for example, Muslims in China. But they suffer disproportionately, Indian Muslims suffer disproportionately in times of communal rioting. Even in times of peace, they can be shunned or stigmatized. I mean, there's some absolute horror stories about even very elite Muslims, well-known film stars in Bombay, not able to get homes to rent because of their religion. And in the last few years, you've had some horrific incidents of lynching of innocent Muslims, which you all have read about. So I've talked about politics, I've talked about social justice, I've talked about culture, and let me finally come to our record in the economic sphere. How robust is the pillar of economic self-reliance? For the first 30 years of independence, economic activity in India was dominated by the state, by what was called the license permit quota Raj, which was dismantled in 1991, not fully, but substantially. And the dismantling of the command and control economy gave rise, as you all know, to a surge of entrepreneurial energies, to very impressive rates of economic growth, and the decline of mass poverty. In the previous session it was mentioned that the state of Maharashtra has a larger GDP than all of Pakistan. And the Indian economic growth story is impressive, is admirable, is widely lauded, and is certainly one reason why Georgetown has an annual conference on India. But there are two dark spots on the Indian economic growth story. One is well recognized, and that's of jobless growth. The fact that the demographic dividend which we counted upon might become a demographic disaster. Now, again, there's room for a study by a sociologist on violence by young men in India. Over the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's a great deal of violence committed by young men in India, and it takes different forms. There are young men who become jihadis. The young men who joined the Hindu equivalent of jihadis, which is the Bajrang Dal. There are young men who become Naxalites. There are young men who join the mobs of, ethnic groups like the Shiv Sena. There are young men who kill themselves. Right. Now, and they're all young men. The violence in India is all committed by young men between the ages of 18 and 30. And obviously, part of this is because of the problem of these young men not getting the kinds of jobs or dignified employment they think they deserve and are entitled to. So this issue of jobless growth, which is being discussed, is clearly a disturbing one. But there's a second dark spot to the Indian growth story, which is absolutely not part of mainstream narrative, and that's a dark spot to which I devoted much of my own early professional life, and that is environmental degradation. India today is an environmental basket case. Our cities are the most polluted in the world. Our rivers are biologically dead. All our great cities were sited on rivers. So you had Delhi on the Yamuna, and Kolkata on the Hooghly, and Pune on the Mula, and so on and so forth. But all these rivers are dead. Our soils are massively contaminated. Groundwater aquifers are depleting at an alarming rate. Forests and biodiversity is threatened, like nothing else. We are an environmental basket case. And I'm not talking climate change here. I'm talking about what Indians have done to their own environment and how they have massively stood it up and how this greatly imperils our future economic growth prospects. This is not discussed. This was not discussed in the Planning Commission. It is not discussed in the Niti Aayog either. And it's absolutely not part of debates on India's future, the environmental crisis that we face. I'm going to give you one quote from Gandhi, because Gandhi was extraordinarily prescient in this regard. In 1928, which is more than 90 years ago, Gandhi said, "God forbid that India industrialize after the manner of the West." God forbid that India industrialize after the manner of the West. And then he continued, "The economic imperialism of a single tiny island kingdom namely England, is today, namely 1928, keeping the world in chains. And then Gandhi continues, if India took to similar economic exploitation, it would strip the world bare like locusts. And India and China indeed might strip the world bare like locusts. Now, the operative phrase in that quote of Gandhi is, God forbid that India industrialize after the manner of the West. Not industrialize full stop. Gandhi knew that we were a poor country, that living standards had to be enhanced, they had to be augmented, but they could have been done using different means, less resource and energy intensive means, and they still can be done. So I'd say the environmental crisis that we face, which puts many question marks against our future growth strategy and potentials, is something that is massively underappreciated within the Indian political class, and dare I say it, within the Indian academy as well. Now, so I've given you a kind of a broad picture of the ideals that Gandhi held out for the nation that was not formed, but that was to be formed, and how we have done as regards social justice, political freedom, cultural pluralism, and economic growth. And how do we assess our progress overall? I'm going to end with a few remarks on how would a historian like myself assess to what extent have we met the ideals that those who founded our nation held out for us. When the country was born, amidst the carnage of partition, few expected it to survive for so long. A year after India was founded, Claude Auchinleck, who was a noticeably sympathetic British army officer who had served in India, wrote to a friend in 1948, a year after independence, he wrote, "The Sikhs will try to set up a separate regime. I think they probably will, and that will be a start of a general decentralization and breakup of the idea that India is a country. India is not a country, it is a subcontinent as varied as Europe. The Punjabi is as different from a Madrasi as a Scot is from an Italian. The British tried to consolidate it, but achieved nothing permanent. No one can make a nation out of a continent of so many nations." Now, this is a very sympathetic Englishman. I came across many such predictions while writing India After Gandhi. I mean, Churchill had said this even before that. He said India is as much a concept as the equator. That's one of his remarks. Now, when I published my book, India After Gandhi, in 2007, I said there that as a multilingual, multi-religious political unit, the Republic of India anticipated the European Union by 50 years. I'll say today that we'll probably outlive the European Union by 50 years. But having said that, I don't say this in any spirit of triumphalism, because one can understand why people were so skeptical. I mean, how could you unite? How could you make a single country out of a population so large and so diverse and so differentiated in terms of religion, language, culture, ecology, lifestyles, cuisine, clothing, and so on and so forth? I come from Bangalore, which is the hub of thousands of startups. Everyone is in Bangalore running a startup, and 90% of them get money. If India was a startup in 1947, no one would have invested in it. Not even the most broad-minded of Bangalore venture capitalists would have invested in it, because they'd have thought this is going down the tube. Like Auchinleck, this is going to collapse. So that we survive is a miracle. That we are a democracy, some sort of democracy, is even more striking. We have falsified the pundits, but we still have much work ahead of us. We are a republic of 29 states. 26 of those 29 states are essentially at peace with themselves and with each other. But Kashmir, which was discussed in the last session, is a place in which there are grievous deficits when it comes to democracy. The state of Manipur in the northeast is another place where there is endemic secessionist violence. Nagaland, which is also in the northeast, is a third state in which there is a very uneasy peace. So we are probably 80% united, but merely 50% democratic. And we are now we've already started voting in our 17th general election, and I've already told you I regard this as the Republic of India's greatest achievement. However, I worry that we are becoming what I call an election-only democracy. So the elections are free and fair. But between one election and the next, there is no accountability. Parliament hardly meets, the press is supine or compromised, institutions are captured by whichever party is in power, the police, the bureaucracy, sometimes even the judiciary, the central bank. And more importantly, this is not restricted to the center. It's also true of the states. In my state of Karnataka, likewise, we'll have an election every 5 years. But in those 5 years, there is no transparency, no accountability, and there is very limited democracy between elections. So we are becoming, I worry that we are becoming an election-only democracy. 72 years after independence, we Indians are more free than when the British left these shores. But we are less free than what the framers of our constitution hoped us to be. Our political freedoms, our economic freedoms, our social freedoms, and our cultural freedoms are all constrained in small or large ways. Much work lies ahead of us. Thank you. So I think Irfan says there's time for questions. So and as Ambassador Verma said, students first. I'll come. That young lady there. I'll come to you. Wait for her. Yeah.
Thank you for your very enlightening words. I am a student from the George Washington University, and with respect to your views on women, I had a question with respect to the Constitution. Because on the one hand, the Constitution says we are all equal, but on the other hand, it also sort of uses a protectionist language towards women, particularly in Article 15, Clause 3. So do you think that is part of the problem?
Well, no, I think the Constitution was drafted mostly by men. I think there were 6 women in the Constitutional Assembly. There were 2 men in particular, Nehru and Ambedkar, who held very progressive views for their time, but they were men. Right. Now, if you look at the way social change takes place, if you look at the history of race relations, it's first Lincoln, and then, then that is, it's often guilt-ridden men or guilt-ridden whites, and then the cause has to be owned by those who actually suffer, right? Now, I'm not an expert on the Constitution. I can't tell you how that article can be rewritten. But you're right that the first wave of legislation promoting gender equality was brought about by guilt-ridden men. And we are fortunate that we had Nehru and Ambedkar. If, shall we say, Patel and Rajaji had been writing the Constitution, we may not have been talking here today. The conservative wing of the Congress party had been in charge of. There are other issues. I think, on gender equality, I think there's a long way to go. I think legally, in my view, this is something on which I depart from my friends on the left. I believe we need a common civil code, which is drafted regardless of what religion you belong to, on the basis of the principle of gender equality. I also believe, and this is where I break common bread with my friends on the left, I think we probably need a women's reservation bill. I think that's something which will, I think, enhance not just women's representation in Parliament, it will enhance civility in Parliament and other such things. So I think maybe the process has to be ongoing. The fact is that the Indian Constitution was drafted by men. Maybe we were fortunate that the men who drafted it were, the right kind of men. I mean, there was, as I said, Nehru and Ambedkar. Among all the people in the Indian freedom movement, Nehru and Ambedkar were the most committed to gender equality, which is why you had universal adult franchise, for example, which you would not otherwise have had. Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah.
Why can't India also have primary elections? So why can't just India have primary elections just like US has? Because Gandhi will run every time, and it's like anybody from Gandhi clan has been running since like years and years. And also, I wanted to ask you if Tulsi Gabbard or Kamala Harris were running as Hindus win the U.S. election, what will be the relationship with Modi was a Hindu nationalist.
Well, I can't answer the second question. That's it's not fair of me to comment on what the Americans should do with their, who they should elect. But on the first question, it's very hard to amend the constitution. But what can be done? So I don't think we can have a system of primaries. We can't even we follow what's called the first past the post system. We can't even have proportional representation, which some people call for. But there is a very simple, reform that is possible under the law, under the constitution, which some groups have been advocating, and I'll explain that. Is this: that says there's a constitution. I live in central Bangalore. Now, I'm going to vote next week. There are 3 major candidates in my constituency. So, which means that the person who wins will certainly guess, and the 3 major candidates are about 55 or 60 minor candidates. Which means that the person who wins will definitely get less than 50% of the vote, might get 40% of the vote and be elected. Now, this is very common in Indian elections, that you have many candidates. And last time, the BJP got 282 seats with 31% of the popular vote. Now, so this is clearly an anomaly. And there's a reform that's been proposed, which is to win, you need to get 50% plus 1 vote in your constituency. So if there are 4 candidates, essentially, if there are more than 2 candidates, if there are 3 or 4 candidates, the way to win is to appeal to caste blocks. So you have Muslim plus Yadav plus something else gives you 33% and you'll win. Whereas if you need more than 50%, if you have to appeal not to a plurality but to a majority of your vote, you're much more likely to talk about roads and electricity and health and education and so on. So I think there are ways in which we can make our electoral system better. But to go towards something totally different would require a new constitution, which really essentially is not feasible today. Yeah. This lady here. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's on now. And so I just had a question I wanted to pick up from Ambassador Verma's. As a historian, you've seen a lot, you've tracked a lot, you've written wonderful books. Are you optimistic for India?
Look, I live in India, and I've never wanted to live anywhere else. I don't want, so that gives you a sense that I am optimistic about India. But I live in a certain part of India. I live in Bangalore. So, if you look at India today, this is sort of, your question allows me to say something which is complementary to what I've already said, right? What are the major fault lines in India today? One is Hindu versus Muslim. One is, maybe inequality. The south where I live is relatively not immune, but has these in minimal ways. And I think what we're going to see is, this election will show a divide between the north and the west and the south and the east. The south and the east will largely not vote for the ruling party. Now, what this tells you is also the south has the fewest seats in parliament. The south has less oppression of Dalits and women, more entrepreneurship, more education, more technical innovation, less violence between Hindus and Muslims, and many fewer seats in parliament. So, effectively, India is being run by, dare I say it, the more reactionary parts of the country right now. So, how does, and so this is something that worries me. Am I optimistic? It's very hard to say, what will happen. What I worry about is, I worry about some of the things I've already talked about. So I worry about religious polarization, and this is partly because I'm a biographer of Gandhi, and Gandhi lived and died for Hindu-Muslim harmony. Other people in this room may think that it's fine to beat up on Muslims. You hear that sentiment in India all the time. Maybe not in this room, but certainly down my street you hear it, right? Now, so I believe that is the ideal of India was, if there was one thing, you can define the ideal of India negatively. India was not supposed to be a Hindu Pakistan. But there are forces in our country who are dominant, who want to make this a Hindu majoritarian state. So I worry about that. I worry about the environmental crisis. I can't say whether we'll come through all of this, you know. And globally, we live in a rather difficult time everywhere. I mean, look at your country, look at Brexit, look at Putin's Russia, look at Erdogan's Turkey, and you think, you know, it's not a particularly happy time anywhere. But they are, at the same time, some optimistic signs. I told you that the link between caste and occupation, the link between caste and occupation was cast in stone. It was impossible for a Dalit to become an entrepreneur or an army general, but now they can. Right. Now, if I was to look at my own family history, and this is not entirely unrepresentative. My grandmother was married at the age of 10 to someone she had never seen. My mother did a degree and chose her marriage partner, but I was restricted to someone in her own caste. And my daughter's not going to listen to me when she gets married, right? Which is freedom, it's expansion, right? It is. So there are ways in which India is moving, is progressing. So it's absolutely impossible to generalize about, where to be pessimistic and where to be optimistic. But I'd say that these 2 or 3 fault lines, the dangerous majoritarian tendencies, not just in the ruling party, but among many ordinary Indians. The historian Mukul Keshavan, who is exactly my age, has seen this change. He has said the common sense of the nation has shifted. Right, and that is something I certainly worry about. Yeah, that young lady there. Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the tribals and why they haven't been able to get that much representation. Because 8% seems like a large population. So is it because they're more, like, what's the reason and what can be done about it?
I'm sorry to have to do this, but there's a long essay in my last collection, Democrats and Dissenters. And it's called Tribal Tragedies in Independent India. So it's a 20, 30-page essay on why this is so. There are many reasons. One is that so please read that whole essay, because I can only give you a short answer here. One is that they are subjected to there are many reasons. Let me try and very quickly give you some. Firstly, they are about 8% of India's population. So that's a large number. That's close to 100 million people. So among the reasons that they are really shafted are, the national movement never talked about them. Gandhi talked about gender equality, caste equality, but tribals were outside his framework. So it took till independence to come in. A second reason is that they suffer from what I call a triple resource curse. The tribals live amidst India's richest forests, alongside our fastest flowing rivers, and on top of our most lucrative mineral deposits. So commercial forestry, large dams, and mining have dispossessed them. There's a study by a sociologist that shows that tribals are 8% of India's population, but 40% of those displaced by development projects. All right, so that's the second reason. A third reason is, which is to do with electoral demography. Dalits or tribals are everywhere in India. They're spread out everywhere. Everywhere they are between 12 and 20% of the population. So we have some 543 parliamentary constituencies. Roughly in 350 constituencies, Dalits are an important voting bloc. Tribals are geographically concentrated in the hills and the forests, so they count in only about 60 constituencies. So the political class doesn't reach out to them. But read that essay; it tells you. But the fact is that it is a terrible, terrible situation. And there's a civil war going on there because Maoist guerrillas have dug deep roots in tribal areas, partly because the forests give them cover, and the violence that escalates, and the tribals are cannon fodder caught in the crossfire. If you read the essay I told you about, which is in my book, and also Nandini Sundar's book, Burning Forest. Yeah.
Pinaki Panigrahi, such an eloquent talk. I was really spellbound. I was spellbound. You rightly said Gandhi was a prophet. I don't think there is any other statement. That's how I perceive him. But only 15, 17 years ago. Until then, I didn't have that type of feeling about him. And now when I look at the world and what India has given to the world, I think it is only Gandhi and maybe Gautam Buddha. Those are the two things Indians have given to the world. Buddha, Gautam Buddha, nothing else. In my opinion, but I'm not the person to comment. My question is, what happened What is the reason for this decay that has happened? And is it because of the Nehru clan and the Congress party or something else?
On Gandhi and the Buddha, it may be, there's an interesting parallel. We gave birth to the Buddha and we kicked him out. So we gave birth to Gandhi and we might kick him out either, too. So in that sense, I would agree with you. What went wrong with India? I mean, I think Gandhi, young people, the Nehru clan is relevant to Nehru. I mean, Nehru was a great builder of modern India, whose posthumous reputation is a reversal of the biblical injunction. In the Bible, it is said, the sins of the father shall be visited on 7 successive generations. In the case of Nehru, the sins of 7 successive generations are retrospectively visited on Nehru. So, when it comes to Nehru was, I mentioned Nehru and Ambedkar. Nehru and Ambedkar were great builders of Indian democracy. Gandhi was a level above. Gandhi was a world figure. Okay. Now, one of the reasons that Gandhi doesn't appeal is because of nonviolence. Nonviolence, dialogue, compromise, negotiation doesn't appeal to young men. Today there is a cult. There's a cult of 3 alternatives to Gandhi in India today. You'll see their pictures everywhere. Contemporaries of Gandhi, they are Bhagat Singh, Bose, and Savarkar. They had nothing in common with each other. Bhagat Singh was a Marxist. Bose was enchanted with fascism. Savarkar was a Hindu majoritarian. The only thing they have in common is that they wanted to blow the hell out of the British. That's all. So I think Gandhi's message of debate, dialogue, compromise somehow doesn't resonate with young Indians. And maybe he doesn't belong to us. He belongs to all of you, like the Buddha. I mean, we kicked out the Buddha too. So it'll stand to reason if we kick out Gandhi. Yeah. So, someone in the back. Yeah, that lady in the back. One last question from the lady in the back. Yeah. Yeah, you. Yeah, it's coming. Yeah.
I just wanted to know your opinion about corruption in India and whether you think the current political and regulatory framework is doing enough to prevent the kind of corruption that goes on.
To repeat what was said sometime earlier today, Irfan will have to make that a topic next time. It's a very important issue, forms of corruption, how they continue, how they can be checked, what means can be used. But it is a pervasive feature of Indian life at all levels. And new government laws haven't helped. I think the electoral bonds, which the Supreme Court is certainly currently hearing, and so far the Supreme Court seems to be excessively cautious in my view. I mean, the Attorney General yesterday or the day before said in court that why should voters know where the money for the political party is coming from? Now, so I think, but that's only one part of corruption. I mean, there's, no Indian can honestly say that he or she has never paid a bribe. No chance. Absolutely no chance. And I'll just end with, well, you should tell Irfan to have a full session on this because it requires. But I'll tell you a humorous story about corruption. I broke a red light in Bangalore some years ago, and the cops stopped me. And I told in the South everyone is very polite. And he said, he was writing, okay, 200 rupees, name? I said, Dr. Ramchandra Guha. Dr. Guha? Okay, 100 rupees, 100 rupees. Okay.
So I've been asked to close the conference, and I just have about 45 minutes of remarks. I just want to let me thank Ram. That was incredible, really incredible, and we were so lucky to have you here. And it's just I'm thinking about Gandhi on Twitter. It's really stuck in my mind now. And let me congratulate all the students and all the speakers and all the panelists for another incredible conference. And right here is the architect and the brainchild. Those of us that end up in policymaking positions, we're fortunate to be there, but we really we don't have much to go on. We look to experts in the field, we look to the writings, we look to the scholarship, And for so long, at least in this country, our institutions were producing Russia scholars and China scholars and transatlantic scholars. They were not producing South Asia scholars, and they were not producing Indian scholars. I think that time is really changing. And there are a few people who are responsible for that, and there are a few people who are at the leading edge of that. And Irfan is at the leading edge of that. And so thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for doing this initiative. I am told now we are supposed to go downstairs and have a celebratory cocktail. And again, thank you very much. Irfan, you should close this for last words, though. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rich. Thank you. Thank you. I should say that Rich came off a flight from Delhi this morning, and he's here, looking sharp and alert in a way that most normal human beings could not. It's been a remarkable day. You know, the best part about doing these conferences, this is now our third India Ideas Conference, but our very first one, before there was an India initiative, was a conclave on Kashmir, at which Omar Abdullah spoke. And he said then, I hope someday I get to come back to Georgetown and not have to talk about the troubles in Kashmir. And unfortunately today, once again, we're talking about the troubles in Kashmir. It suggests that history is always with us, and yet we have to be optimistic. That's what it means to be a professor. That's what it means to be an educator. And when I look at the young Indian students who are at Georgetown now, all of whom have worked incredibly hard over the last months and weeks and days, hours, to make this conference possible. It's all student-powered, 100%. You can't help but be optimistic about the future of India. So on that note, I invite you downstairs to see both the research that students at Georgetown have been doing on India, on irrigation issues. They're on a study commissioned by the World Bank, where they asked my undergraduate students to write a major report on irrigation. Let me show them off to you. Come on downstairs, and thank you so much for being here.